Hello to everybody. My name is Dr. Teresa Nowotna, and I'm a Korea Foundation Fellow at Center for European Integration and a Fellow at Korea Europe Center at the Institute for Korean Studies at Free University of Berlin. This series is trying to look at North Korea from slightly different angles, and also to try to invite people who have been on the ground, who worked with local administrations. So for that reason, I'm very happy to welcome here André. I will just say a few words about him. He is at the moment International Director of Regeneration International, which is an organization that promotes food, farming, and land use systems that regenerate and stabilize climate systems, the health of the planet and the people. So obviously, he's been working on a topic which is becoming more and more important, and hopefully that importance is across countries and regions. But the reason why Dr. Kani invited him for this lecture is that André was the longest-serving president of IFOAM Organics International, which is the world agent and umbrella body for the organic sector. And he's currently an IFOAM ambassador. And during his time as president, which was in 2011 to 2017, he was active in IFOAM's organic agricultural food security projects in the DPRK. So André actually visited the country many times, and he ran training courses and gave lectures on the ground. André has been also a prolific writer. He's the author of 2 books, Myth of Safe Pesticides and Poisoning Our Children. And he has also published and consulted in other media and other outlets. And he's also been working with different governments. And what I also like very much about him, that he is actually also a farmer. So he has an organic tropical fruit farm in Daintree in Australia. And he is indeed joining us from Australia. So that's why I can see that it's pretty dark already there, right? So thank you very much. I don't want to even calculate what the time zone difference is. So thank you.
It's a little bit of a time. It's after 11 o'clock at night.
After 11 at night.
Thank you.
Yeah. So wonderful. So thank you so much. So thank you for your stamina. And I will now invite you to spend maybe 45 minutes, 1 hour on your lecture, and then we will have time for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Teresa, and also Dr. Hoje. Firstly, it's the beginning of our monsoon season. I hope the frogs aren't too loud. They know the rain is coming, so the boys and girls are getting together because it's time to make baby frogs. So they're celebrating, so you can hear it at the back. Very important time. Anyway, I just want to say, look, I'm really pleased to be invited because I think the DPRK is the most misunderstood country on our planet. I'm so glad that you are taking the time to explain it to students because, for many of us, it could be a flashpoint and it shouldn't be. And I just want to say from my experience, I'm probably one of the few people who've gone from Seoul to Pyongyang on the same day. And I want to say the people on both sides of the border regard themselves Korean and want to be one country again. It's governments and politics that are stopping it. And I particularly want to say I believe the sanctions are unbelievably cruel and unproductive and have failed and made things worse. We need to de-escalate and start becoming friends with the DPRK and bring them fully into our global society. That is the most important thing we can do. With why organic agriculture in the DPRK? Because I think a lot of people would be surprised why we worked with the European Union and at a very high level in the DPRK government to do this. Our project, this is when I was president of IFOAM Organics International, we were funded by the European Union for 3 projects, originally 1, and the first one was so successful, the European Union basically approached us to do the next projects. There's quite a few NGOs working in the DPRK. Our funders would go to our lectures and see our project. From their point of view, we were one of the most productive and successful in the DPRK. In most cases, we have to go to funders to apply. it's very nice when funders go to us and want us to do it because they actually were impressed with what we're doing. So the next two projects, the European Union came to us to do it. Very importantly, these projects weren't subject to the severe sanctions, or only partially subject, because feeding people in the DPRK is considered a humanitarian action. But saying that, getting funds into the DPRK to build things, like classrooms and paying for training and things like this is still really difficult because of the sanctions, even though that, technically the sanctions don't apply to us. We had to operate special bank accounts in China, and logistically it is very difficult because of the way the sanctions regime is done. However, we were there. The aim of our project was to assist the DPRK to achieve food security, because the sanctions are there to get, technically to get regime change, or get the regime to change some of its actions. The fact is, the sanctions, the real outcome is affecting the average person in the DPRK and their food security. And I'd like to say too that this is the reality of sanctions, like in Iran. I've also worked in Iran and Cuba and other places. And I want to say that the sanctions don't affect the elite or governments, very rarely. It's the poorest and lowest socioeconomic groups that are hurt the most with sanctions. They are cruel and they are not effective. And very few cases of sanctions have ever made a difference in changing the outcome for various countries. International sanctions meant that the DPRK could not get access to chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Before, they used to get them in from the Soviet Union and from China. But even before then, I think actually, and it goes back to, the Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, but particularly Kim Jong-un. And Kim Jong-un, I think, is one of the, misunderstood leaders on the planet. They poke fun of him and say the big fat boy and everything. But I regard Kim Jong-un as the Deng Xiaoping of the DPRK. I was in China when Deng Xiaoping started the first reforms to turn China into really what is becoming the major economic powerhouse on our planet now. And in my time in the DPRK, I've seen that Kim Jong-un has been putting in similar reforms. And, never forget, Kim Jong-un was educated in Switzerland, highly educated, and he's not stupid. Anybody who can survive the system there and still be around is no fool. And the types of reforms he's putting in, made big differences. And I think, unfortunately, COVID has probably sent things backwards and even more severe sanctions. But I think what is really important for us is that Kim Jong-un actually mandated organic agriculture and was consistent with the Juche philosophy of self-reliance. And I actually have those documents. They're given to me at every year when they have the major meetings, and particularly of the party, and do the major policy issues, but mandated that the DPRK became fully organic, because it meant that they could do things under self-reliance and not import things. So let's talk about the project. The project was titled Building Sustainable Food Systems and Capacities for Organic Agriculture in the DPRK. We just shortened it to BOKK, so I'll use BOKK. Look, one thing I want to say, but I suppose everybody here knows it, I'll use the word DPRK. I really don't like the word North Korea. I think there's only one Korea, and they don't believe that North Korea exists. They actually regard it as an insult. I learnt that very early on, so that's why I will say DPRK. Now, we work with Pintech, and based in Pyongyang, And they were our host organisation. You have to have a host organisation. And we ran our courses in the Pintec headquarters. There's a picture of the Pintec headquarters and a little sign showing our when our courses were on that they'd put up when we were running the courses when we were there. They began in 2012, and then a second one in 2015, and then a third one started in 2018. I was president from 2011 and to 2017. So I was involved in the first two, and then I haven't been involved in the last one. That's happened after my time as president. They were focusing, these projects are focused on developing the organic sector and paying particular attention to food and nutrition security. And I want to use this word nutrition, not just about growing empty calories. It's making sure that the people of the DPRK are adequately fed. They're healthy. That's what this project is about. Just trying to understand the issue here. It's a very mountainous country, very beautiful country, actually. But only about 17% of its landmass is arable, can be used for agriculture. They need to feed over 25 million people. So if you work that out, that's about 0.8 hectares available to feed each person. Not a lot of land, but on the other hand, there's countries in Europe that actually have less land, like the Netherlands, Denmark, if you want to start looking at comparing population densities and land. So the big issue is, can organic agriculture produce enough food to achieve this? Because, like I say, it's pushed out that organic agriculture is lower yielding. So you're talking about a large population with very small land mass going to a low yielding system. That's the cliche. And how can it be done without lots of chemical fertilizers and pesticides to get high yield? I want to talk this through because I think this is a really important issue here. How do we feed a country that has been suffering food insecurity without all these chemicals and pesticides that, the mainstream says it's the only way we can feed the world. Unless we use all these toxic chemicals, we cannot feed the world. So now I want to talk about the world and contextualize this within food security in our planet. We're pushing these chemicals because we need to feed the world. Let's look at food security and how well we are doing with the current mainstream paradigm of agriculture. And these are figures from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. If you look at the top graph, you see from 1969 through to 1995, the world was actually making progress in stopping food insecurity. Then around the mid-1990s, it changed, and you can see the graph going up. More and more people are becoming food insecure. If you look at Table 2, which is also from the Food and Agriculture Organization, you can see that food insecurity is on the whole increasing around the world. I want to use Africa as a reference continent here. Africa is one of the least overpopulated continents. It's got a lot of land, but it's got some of the greatest food insecurity. So the reason I want to put this here is that hectares or acreage is not the deciding factor for food insecurity. Africa is not overcrowded. It's probably got more land per person than any other continent. It's got the greatest areas of food insecurity. And if you have a look, in our modern times, food insecurity is increasing. Between 2005 and 2020, we've gone up, almost 100 million more people are food insecure. What food insecure means is there's periods of the year where people do not eat any food, nothing. They go hungry. They go to bed hungry. The children go to bed hungry. And what I want to show here is that in Africa, food insecurity increased when there was a major push to bring in industrial agriculture with GMOs, synthetic pesticides, and fertilizers. An example of one of the major failures, and still pushed as one of the great initiatives, is called the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, called AGRA, funded by Bill and Melinda Gates and the Rockefeller Foundations, launched in 2006. And the vision was doubling agricultural yields and the incomes of 30 million people, small-scale producers, halving hunger and poverty in 20 countries. They received $1 billion from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the US, UK, and German governments. And the money was spent to promote industrial agriculture on GMOs, imported synthetic pesticides, and fertilizers. So let's look at the outcome of this in 2006 to now. Instead of halving hunger, the situation of the 13 focus countries deteriorated. The number of people suffering from extreme hunger increased by 30% in the countries of intervention during the AGRA years. I want to get this across, and at the moment, it's actually because of COVID, things are even worse in Africa, but it's not making the news. You know, everybody talks and about North Korea or DPRK and criticizes it over food security, but I want you to have a look at all these other countries that are actually doing worse than the DPRK. And I'm someone who goes to all these countries and gets to see it, gets the data. This is good data. So where did it go wrong? Because they went to monoculture cash crops. The idea is you grow this cash crop, you sell it in the market, you get money, then you can buy your food. Whereas before they used to grow crops to feed their family. They had a diversity of crops and they sold the surplus for income. So as a result, the diversity of foods decreased and the money they got was not enough to buy the food they needed. And when we talk about food security on the planet, it's not about producing more food. At the moment, the world produces double what is needed. We actually waste much of the food. There is no food shortage on this planet. It's our marketing system that is the problem, not our production system. But the whole problem with our export-based system, where using Africa as an example, you get a cash crop, sell it and get money and buy food, is that what we find? The hungry are too poor to buy it. Doesn't matter how much food we have on the markets. If you've got no money, you cannot buy it. That is the problem here. On the other hand, in the wealthy countries, it's the other way around. We have an obesity problem. We have too much food, and much of it's highly processed, empty of nutrition, and it's causing an epidemic of what we call, non-contagious chronic diseases like obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart, liver, cancer, all these other diseases. So let's break it down now and analyze who the hungry are and what we can do to solve this problem. Because this is very important when we talk about the DPRK, to put it in this context. DPRK, and everybody likes to say it's this hermit country. It's part of our planet. It's one of our countries, and it is contextualized within our global system. And in many ways, it is similar to most countries in our planet, which is smallholder farmers. Agriculture, not done on a large scale like in the US and in Australia. It's small farms. Korea doesn't have these big hectares of land. It has small pockets of land. So when we look at the hungry, 80% of the hungry don't live in Sydney cities. They live in rural areas. And 50% of them are actually smallholder farmers, the people who grow the food. 20% are the landless who are dependent on working for farmers. Now let's look at who produces our food. And I think this is a really important issue here. 70% of actual food that we eat comes from these same people, the hungry. In fact, FAO's data shows that when we look at the developing world or the global south, 80% comes from these small farmers. In fact, industrial agriculture actually uses most of the land in the world, only grows 30% of the food we eat. Most of it is used for commodity markets. Very different thing to get across. It's not feeding the world. It's producing commodities. So what we need to do is rethink food production and nutrition. And the word we're using now is local food sovereignty. Let's start at the local level, not big global markets and exporting. We need to produce the food where it is needed. I suppose what I want to say here is instead of thinking about cash crops and export markets, we put food on the table first and we work out, and then we export the surplus. But the priority needs to be to feed our family and communities and our nation first before we export to other countries. What I want to say here is this actually aligns really well with the Juche philosophy. I think one of the really interesting things for me, I'm probably one of the few people who've actually read the the DPRK Constitution and spent a lot of time actually reading, Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un, because I wanted to understand the country I'm in and how it works and everything. And you look at the constitution of the DPRK, it's actually one of the best in the world. I just think it's this sort of dichotomy between what the constitution says and what is actually happening on the ground is, and how it's being enforced. There are other issues, but Juche, I think, is a really interesting philosophy. In many ways, I think it's a good one. The implementation, leaves a bit to be desired. What I want to do now is go to the next thing and let's look at evidence-based. And so we've given an overview. In the end of the day, if we're going to do this, we need to base what we do on evidence. I think this is really critical. Philosophies and theories are good for us to understand, but when we start down to the practical level, we need solid evidence. When we talk about these smallholder farmers, which is what really, all a career is, north and south. But in most of the world, what we find is that these traditional farmers are what we call organic by default. But if we teach them good regenerative organic methods, better soil nutrition, improved pest and disease control, water use efficiency, how to improve that, better weed management and agroecological systems to increase biodiversity, we can get significant yields. So I want to go back to Africa. I started with Africa again, and I wanted to show how where billions have come in from Bill and Melinda Gates and the US government and others for industrial agriculture, and it's been a total failure. It's led to more food insecurity. Let's look what we've done with thousands of dollars, not even millions of dollars. The organic industry, we don't get big amounts of money. Evidence-based again. So this is a review by two United Nations organisations, the United Nations National Conference on Trade and Development and the Environment Program. And they looked at 114 projects in Africa covering 2 million hectares and 1.9 million farmers. And what they found is in our projects, when we went in, worked with traditional farmers and taught them how to improve their methods, on average, we had 116% increase in yields. In East Africa, we got 128%. The other one I think is really important that this report showed that in the whole of Africa, actually, where they're putting industrial agriculture, food is actually 10% lower. So the evidence supports that our systems, working with the smallholder farmers, is the best way to achieve food security in Africa. And I just want to give you an example of one of our projects. This is one of our, when I say our, I'm talking my iPhone Organics International. This is one of our member organisations, the Institute of Sustainable Development. And they went into Tigray in northern Ethiopia. This is a country, part of the country just, in civil war again, unfortunately, but before they were in civil war and thousands of people were dying. We're talking about food insecurity where people die. and basically take a whole regenerating the whole landscape attitude instead of the industrial model of just putting chemicals. So rehabilitate, fix up the gullies, put in ponds. Now we start using leguminous crops like fava beans that can put nitrogen in for free, but also provide high protein food. We start bringing in biodiversity, what we call functional biodiversity, things like fertilizer trees and long grasses. And then we can use all this biomass to make compost that we can use to fertilize the crops, for their different grains like teff, wheat, and barley. And this is the result. And this is really good data published by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, 900 samples over 7 years. So high confidence in this data. If you have a look at the lowest bar on the left-hand side, that's the control, the standard traditional system. The green bar is where the farmers use compost. The next bar on the right-hand side is where they use chemical fertilizers. This wasn't done as an organic project and you had to do it. Farmers had the choice. But I think what is really important to show here is that everywhere they use compost got higher yields. The important thing about compost, there's no cost. It's an opportunity cost. They can make it. The family can make it. Whereas the fertilizer, they had to borrow money to buy. So the farmers who used compost, they had less production costs, they had higher yields. This project was done with good scientific rigor, and you see one of the scientists at the field. Why I wanted to show you this is that this is the same field, the same variety of wheat. One side is grown with compost, the other side with chemical fertilizers. And it was based on best practices by the universities in the field trial. The wheat grown with chemical fertilizers required spraying with fungicides because they got stripe rust. It gave a yield of 1.6 tonnes per hectare after being sprayed. And there's a cost of fertilizers and toxic chemicals. The composted gave a yield of 6.5. There's hardly any stripe rust. Now, this is the same variety of wheat, the same soil, the same weather conditions, and the same level of fungal spores out there. The difference is management. And this is what I want to show here, that we have good science. With the right management, we can get high yields. The other thing I think is really important is climate resilience. We all know about what they call the arduous march, when DPRK had droughts, and then when the drought breaks, you had floods. And these floods just didn't flood the fields, actually washed them away. They were so severe, in some cases. But there was massive food insecurity and people died. And the issue, when you've got a large population with a small amount of land, climate extremes can make all the difference between whether you feed yourself or you don't. And we know that's actually going on at the moment in the DPRK, information I'm getting from my sources. But anyway, what I want to show you here is that we have good science where with organic farming, where we increase the soil organic matter levels, we get higher yields in climate extremes. I'm not going to run through all this, in detail. Everybody's allowed to have a copy of this. I'll put the references there if you want to look it up yourself. I just want to give you an example. For instance, this is a long-term field trial in Switzerland where you've got an organic system where you've built up soil organic matter, and the other, which is best practice conventional, managed by one of the universities at the best level. It rains at planting. The organic field keeps its integrity. Conventional erodes, washes away, and that field will give no yield at all, whereas the organic will go on to give a very good yield. To explain that, when you increase organic matter, that's what organic agriculture does, the soil keeps its integrity. So you can see where these come from another field trial. In this case, it says Switzerland, Pennsylvania, long-term field trials. The soil from the organic sector, we put it in water, it keeps its integrity. It doesn't collapse and erode. The conventional erodes when you get a major rain event. So it loses yield. The crops get destroyed. The organic keep their integrity. If you go further into the science to explain this is an electron microscope picture of Humus, one of the important components of soil organic matter. If you look at it there, it looks like a sponge. It's actually a polymer, sticky. That's why the soil holds together and doesn't erode. It's like a glue. But it's also, if you see there, it's a sponge. It can hold up to 30 times its own weight in water. And this is the other really important issue here. When you talk about somewhere like the DPRK that is very reliant on rain-fed agriculture, what we find here, by increasing soil organic matter, we can increase the amount of rain we can capture and store. So at the moment, very common in Africa, Asia and Australia, and this includes the DPRK, there's less than 1% soil organic matter. In fact, in most cases, it's 0.5%. It means when it rains, you can capture about 80,000 litres. Anything else runs off and erodes away. But if you can get it up to around 6%, and I'm using 6% there because I've done that in my own farm, gone from less than 1% to 6% in 11 years, and I know many other cases, we can start storing around a megalitre of water per hectare at the root zone. That's phenomenal. You think about megalitre dams. The best one is to store it where you need it, under the roots of your crop. Let's have a look at another field trial, again, a very good scientific field trial, and it's a drought. This is the same soil, the same variety of maize. Everything's the same except for one strip. The management has been different. There's been organic agriculture. We've built up the soil organic matter. It doesn't know it has a drought. The conventional is suffering. And so if you look at an independent peer review of the system by Professor David Pimentel from Cornell University and his colleagues, what they found was with these systems in the drought years, on average, organic gets around 30% higher yields. This is really important information when we're trying to get food security in countries with climate change. The last part I want to end up is changing the system. Instead of just simple monocultures, going over to these highly diverse systems where we put a lot of biodiversity, a lot of crops into the system. And there's a very good book on it called Health Per Acre. I haven't got the time to go into detail over it. But what we're doing now, instead of just measuring, tons of rice per hectare, we start looking at the nutrition per hectare. This is really important. If we're feeding people, we want them to get nutrition. It's not about how much rice. It's about how much nutrition. Now, when we start using this as the basis of redefining our agricultural output, we can get a significant difference between the conventional monoculture and what we call these biodiverse organic mixed farming. And here, this study shows if you measure it in calories, what we need to feed people is the basic unit of nutrition. We can get around 5 million calories as against 3.7 with the conventional. It's a huge difference. So if we break this down, in this case it's done under acres, 1 acre under these mixed cropping systems can supply 2,500 calories is considered the basic level per person if we're looking at how to give food security. We can do about 5.4 per adults per year per acre. DPRK has approximately 2 acres, which is 0.8 hectares of land per person. So in other words, we're talking technically with these systems, we could feed 10 times the population of the DPRK. That's what I want to get across here. I think it's really important for me to contextualize what we are trying to achieve, the logic behind it, the systems behind it, and the evidence-based science, which is and practice. These are really important. It's not just a philosophical thing. We're trying to do something really important here, and that's to stop people from dying. What did we do? How did we do it? Well, we held training courses. We actually built a purpose-built classroom in the Pentec office. This is a picture of one of our training courses. What we did is brought in trainers from around the world. You can see one who we brought in from North America sitting next to me. A lot of the people, the participants and the organisers who are at this event, there's actually a lot more there, but anyway, courses were very comprehensive in content delivery and participation. So, and we broke it into the practical, academic, and policy, which is really important. We wanted to cover the important issues. So let's talk about the practical first, which is the farming. So this is DPRK. We brought in the farm managers from several farms. Now, this is actually a first in the DPRK. Everything tends to be siloed. There are other NGOs working there, and you don't know what's going on, who's doing what. Although what would happen is every Friday, all the NGOs working in this area, food security, we'd have a special meeting in the diplomatic zone in Pyongyang to try and find out who was doing what and how we could work together. But that's another issue to talk about another day, what NGOs and what is happening in Pyongyang. We were the first group now that actually allowed a whole lot of different farms together to mix with foreigners. It was quite a breakthrough. And this is part of Kim Jong-un's progressive opening up. When I first went to the DPRK, we'd have our phones taken off us, computers checked. And then each time it got progressively easier. In the end, I was allowed to have my phone and computer, no one checked, I was never refused a photograph anywhere. I'd ask just in case, because like I say, I like the DPRK, but I don't want to have to spend years there and not be able to leave because I've done something stupid. It still is a, how can you say, a brutal regime. And, you still got to be mindful of it, even if we've got good contacts with it. And that's another side. Hopefully people are talking about what Kim Jong-un has done and the progressive opening up, particularly the market system and what they've done to feed people and other issues there. I do regard him like Deng Xiaoping. But anyway, that's another issue. We also brought in academics because it's really important that we have the whole research and scientific community behind us, not against us. And they understand it, and they are actively involved in implementing it, because it is really important. So we brought in researchers, professors and lecturers from several universities and research institutions, and then, of course, having government. So we brought in a wide variety of government, not just agriculture, environment. In fact, environment was really supportive of us, but health and trade. So we had managers from these departments actively sitting in our courses. The presenters, we brought in expert presenters from around the world, and these include experts from North America, one from a friend of mine from Cuba because of Cuba's experience with sanctions and how they used agroecology and organic agriculture for food security. I thought that would be very important, particularly since Cuba and the DPRK are friends and close contacts. From Europe, and of course myself from Australia. We chose them based on their areas of expertise that we believe would be specifically useful for the DPRK. We just didn't get someone in because they knew organic agriculture. There was a specific set of problems, and we needed people with the expertise who could put in solutions for those problems. So we put a lot of thought into who we got, how we got them, how we did it. Now, the lectures and presentations were translated sequentially from English to Korean. We would speak and then it'd be translated. But really, most of the participants were fluent in English because in the DPRK, as you know, most people now learn English, particularly when they get higher education. So there's actually a very good level of English there. In fact, in many ways, better than South Korea. The content, we made sure we had very good PowerPoint presentations with good images and data, so it's easy to understand. It's very important to get that across. And of course, we left these in, the DPRK as further use as resource materials. We also produced dedicated. We turned many of them, not all of them, but many of them into dedicated training manuals that were translated into Korean by Pintech. we built a research and resource library in the Pintec classroom. Now, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, we got good contacts south of the border. So we brought in a lot of materials, a lot of very good material in South Korea, books, manuals, information, videos. But one of my meetings, my supervisor, whatever you want to call it, minder that you have, said to me that they couldn't understand them. What do you mean? It's Korean. What I learned is how the languages have changed. In the South, you've got all the borrowed words from English, and also there are dialectal differences. In the North, they've kept it pure. In fact, they've banned borrowed words. And so people in the North don't understand any of these borrowed words. And we actually had to have material translated from South Korean to North Korean. And I think that's going to be an issue when it's reunified, that by now that they're starting to talk two different languages. The delivery, in the Pintec classroom, we gave the theory, the overview, and which is very important. We delivered some of the theory in the main hall at Sangun Farm, which is in South Pyongyang province, which is actually north of Pyongyang. We did practical field demonstrations at Sangun Farm, and then we'd follow up all that back in the classroom with revisions and discussions about it back in Pyongyang. So this is Sangun Farm, where and you see examples of our field trials that we did, and it's a demonstration and for practical training. We supervised the setting up of the field trials, but we also opened it up to the farm workers, whereas we couldn't bring everyone into the classrooms. So as many of the managers, these are collective farms run by management. But when we did the field trials, any farm workers were invited. Of course, they sometimes would have a lot. Other times, they were harvesting or doing other things. We felt it was really important that the actual workers themselves could actually see what we're doing, how we were doing it. What was really important we learned is that we had to follow up with inspections and subsequent visits to make sure things were being done. And then we would review it and would look at changes in practices or ensure the practices were properly implemented. This took us a little while to work this out and learn how to work with the DPRK system and the problems. Once we did it, the trial started to be run really correctly, and delivering good results. In fact, I remember in my last visits, I was so pleased with what they were doing and how they were doing it. It got a momentum. It was really good. We did a scientific conference with the researchers and academics. Most of the papers came out of the DPRK. We did, because we wanted this to be sort of international, we did bring in presenters from other countries to present their papers. We did a call for papers. We received around 30 papers in English from the DPRK, and I can't tell you how pleasantly surprised I was with their quality. They were of a very high international standard. And I think I want to get this across is that the universities, and my experience with the universities in the DPRK is that they are very good. And actually, I suppose the people within the universities are privileged. They actually do get internet access. They do get access to international journals and science. That their expertise and knowledge is as good as any academics in other universities around the world I've been to. In fact, in some cases, I'd say that they are really up there. It surprised me. I did not expect the quality that bodes well for this country, in the future. Some of the implementation is looking at making fertilizers, what we call biofertilizers and composts on farm, and to replace the use of chemical fertilizers. Now, the advantage of this is that these are made with local products. One of them, for instance, is just getting the slurry out of the rivers and creeks, and then all the other waste products and bioproducts, and we can make these composts, which are really good, cost next to nothing. It's just opportunity costs, which once again is completely consistent with the Duché philosophy of self-reliance. Also, I suppose this is the area where you want to talk about a big difference between industrial monocultures using chemical fertilizers and pesticides and what we're doing with using biology to build soil fertility, and we call these cover crops. And it's a very different way of thinking. The idea is people think, anything that's not my cash crop is a weed. Well, we're showing you bring in what we call functional biodiversity. We can bring in a whole range of ecosystem services that are actually powered by solar energy. Costs nothing, costs of a few seeds. But we know that they can fix nitrogen, feed the soil microbiome to make minerals available, suppress diseases, as well as acting as hosts for beneficial insects to control pests. So there's a whole range of free ecosystem services instead of expensive fertilizers and pesticides. And it only costs the price of a few seeds. It's cheaper than chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and it's better for the health and the environment. So let's now talk about the outcomes. We placed emphasis on relationship between agriculture and nutrition, because in the end, it's about getting nutrition to people, keeping people healthy. This is the really important. It's not about yield per hectares. It's about health per hectare. I think this is a really important paradigm shift in what we're doing. We wanted to reach, increase the outreach across a broad area. It's not just, we're working on a field with a few farm workers. We wanted to work with managers, farm workers, the academics, and the government policy people, which is really important. So what did we achieve? Well, we trained over 250 agricultural and nutritional professionals, and we reached another 800 through setting up dissemination services. On an academic level, we provide a library, books, research papers, scientific conference, information on the latest developments. We connected them with the latest developments, and they're still connected. At a policy making, we trained a wide cross-section of government officers in the multifunctional benefits. So they understood it, and they became advocates for change. We wanted to be supportive. This has come from Kim Jong-un. What you find, and I think this is a really important issue here, the other issues, is in a command economy, and when people don't have the expertise, you get this sort of inertia, and very importantly, this fear of being punished for failure. No one likes to report bad news in the DPRK. It's not very good for your long-term life expectancy. And so people are very frightened about doing something innovative. And this is a big problem. The top-down command structure, it's very top-down command. People don't want to think for themselves. You stop innovation and independent decision-making. And that's difficult when you're trying to do a major paradigm shift in a country. And, of course, the lack of financial resources due to sanctions. It is a real problem. What we found is repeated follow-up visits are needed. We've got to go back. Constant supervision is needed to make sure that they're done properly. Once you do it, it is really important, because in the end, we need successful implementation, good results if we want it scaled up. If it doesn't work, they're not going to go any further with it. It's very important that what we did is successful. In that way, they will go further with it. So these are the results that we established a model farm and demonstration site for organic agricultural practices. We built up Pintech's role as a networking, capacity building organic organisation. That's very important for us, that rather than us parachuting in experts, in the long term, we have a good, reliable organisation on the ground who can do it and follow up. We built technical capacity and knowledge dissemination. And the fourth one is that, we sensitise various institutions in the DPRK. So building, you could say, a new culture behind this paradigm shift. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you.
Thank you very much, André. That was really excellent. I can see lots of clapping emojis here coming up. So yes, from me for sure as well. But for the moment, thanking André so much again, also for staying up so late. I assume it must be almost 1 o'clock back where you are.
Yeah.
So I hope you will now have a good night's sleep.
I just want to say, look, I actually appreciate the opportunity, and I'm so glad you're doing it because, the DPRK is a country that very misunderstood, and it's a country that we need to support, not for the ruling class, but for the Koreans themselves. And the other thing I just want to say, to someone who spent a lot of time on both sides of the peninsula, that all Koreans want to be one country. They love their country and they want to be united. And it's governments that are stopping it. There's a will there with Koreans, and just like Germany, it could be back together again as a whole country. And I think that's something that we need to aim for.
Yes, well, that's a very positive vision for the future. One more time, thank you so much. Have a good night. Have also good evening for everyone in Seoul, and see you in 1 month.
Okay. Ciao, everybody.